Welcome back to SEACON Global. I'm Daniel Terhorst-North, and today I'm going to be speaking with my colleague Anna Urbaniak about swarming part 3, achieving agility at scale. Now, regular SEACON attendees will know the history of this. It started some time ago. It started about 3 years ago. The story so far, I got cross is what happened. I got cross I'll name names. I got cross about SAFe. I got cross about less. I got cross about these big package methodologies that came lumbering in, involved a whole amount of money changing hands, and then lumbered out again, and nothing much had changed. So I made up my own acronym. I came up with swarming. So I figured, scaling without a religious methodology. It's a legit acronym because it has a lowercase vowel, because you have to have a lowercase vowel if you're going to be an agile methodology. And the general theme of this talk and this article that I wrote is that package methods don't work. And it's because package methods can't work. They solve a particular problem in a particular context. To the extent you have that context, fine, but you don't, right? Or if you do, you don't have it for long. And so the package methods themselves don't evolve with you. So that was the general theme. Then I came back about a year later and I spoke about swarming part 2. We call it swarming into action. And this was my experience report of implementing this at scale at an Indian telco called Jio. And I've been working with them for a couple of years now. Fascinating company, amazing vision, amazing aspirations. These folks built a telco, a 4G telco at India scale in a handful of years and now have close on 400 million active subscribers. It's an amazing story. And I was in there with my team and we were looking at how to make the organization more effective. And the message from swarming part 2 was the idea of continual transition, right? You're never done. And so that has to become your core operating model. And I talked about 6 streams that we'd identified of work that we were doing. And the idea that you structured those streams as a program of work, and that program of work has priorities. So I'm going to hand you to my colleague Anna Urbaniak, who's going to talk about where we are with part 3.
So the headline for part 3 is you cannot scale agile. You can, however, enable agility at scale through autonomy and alignment. And in this talk, we will unpack those terms in a very practical way for you. We will start with alignment. So alignment by definition is being in line with or in agreement with others. And in the organizational context, there are 3 things that we've got to be aligned on. The first one is the alignment of direction. And here we're talking holistically about product strategy. And what we mean about holistically, it is not just about the customer. It's also about the technology and the business side of everything that we do. The second is the alignment of practice. And when we talk about practice, we mean this needs to be defined and it needs to be implemented organizational wide. It doesn't work if we just rely on the goodwill of the people coming up bottom up and create a consistent practice that is aligned across the organization. And the last one is the alignment of focus. And alignment of focus starts on the top of the organization with organizational wide OKRs that actually consist of organizational vision. And then they cascade down. So they cascade down in order to create focus for everyone. And that is for your product as well as the practice across the organization. Because we need to know where we are going and also how we are getting there.
So this breaks up, interestingly, into 2 kind of clear areas. There's the area of strategy, which is your alignment of direction and practice, and the area of execution, which is what you're going to do next, how you're going to decide on priorities. What we've learned is that alignment of direction and alignment of practice is an organizational structural outcome. You have to build an organization deliberately. You structure an organization deliberately to optimize for product strategy, to optimize for flow of value. So that's your alignment of direction. Likewise, you need to have deliberate organization design around practice. we've done this as an experiment. We built a whole load of communities of practice, and they're super popular, and they're very high functioning, and they're all volunteer led. And what we're still not getting is, across an organization, alignment of practice. So that needs to happen as an organization, a deliberate organizational construct. Now, most organizations, the structure of them is a historical birth, right? It's how they happen to have grown over the years. So you can look at it as an anthropology study rather than as a optimized for anything study. So a significant part of swarming, a significant part of agility at scale is about making deliberate choices about what shape your organization is going to be, and then moving in that direction. Okay, so that's a little bit about alignment. Now let's take a look at autonomy.
So autonomy, once again, starting with unpacking the term and this definition, is being independent of other parts or independent of other organisms. And very often in the organizational context, the kind of work that we do in the world of agility at scale really talks about autonomy of teams. And I really want to use that as a practical example when we talk about autonomy, is what does it take to build an autonomous team and give that team enough autonomy, as that is very often spoken about, but quite difficult to do. And what we have learned working together with Daniel is that autonomy requires to be looked at from two sides. It requires to be looked at from the demand side as well as the supply side. So the demand side is very much about the kind of things that we need to be in place and we're trying to achieve. And then supply side is very much around the things we need in order to achieve those. But they do come together, and they are situations in which they overlap, and we'll discuss those through an example. So the first element on the demand side is an objective. So, and when we talk about an objective, we really mean purpose. It's the reason why we're here. What are we trying to achieve? So if we think about an autonomous teams, it very often, the effective teams will start with actually knowing why we're here, knowing what we're trying to achieve, what kind of value we're trying to deliver. And if that is unclear, then it becomes quite difficult for the team to really truly feel autonomous. The next one is constraint. And constraints could be, they like boundaries. And in the language of theory of constraints, they could be a governing constraints or enabling constraints. And if we think about example here, they're just like a rule of the road. They could be the things that we must, as a team, know what are the different compliant things we've got to put in place while trying to deliver particular value. They can also be things like, what kind of path to life does this organization have? So they're really contextual in terms of the context of the organization and the things that we've got to know regarding our industry, our organization, how things work around here. The third thing on the demand side is accountability. And accountability is of what? So are we doing the right thing? And accountability of how is doing the thing right. So here is when, as a team, for example, we've got to have an accountability for delivering that objective. And we also got to hold accountability for staying within our boundaries, for staying within those constraints. And in this situation, anytime that accountability becomes someone else's or becomes being outside of the team, that's when it kind of turns into this culture of blame. And this is where organizationally we've got to bring it into practice, that accountability stays with the team that is achieving that objective. On the supply side, we've got capability, and capability are skills, information, and experience that we need in order to achieve an objective. And I must say, this is the one that is one of my favorite parts when it comes to building autonomous teams, is because there is a lot of interesting techniques we've got to put in place in order, and some of them actually quite creative, in order to truly build capable teams that are able to achieve the objectives, that have the skills, have the experience. This requires a lot of self-awareness, a lot of awareness of others, and sometimes navigation of the organization in order to bring that capability to the team to truly recognize the autonomous part of this particular element. The next one is resources. So what we mean by resources here is anything from funding, such as money, but also it can be infrastructure, it could be the licenses that you need, it could be any kind of digital or physical stuff that we actually need in order to do our work effectively. Then there are many examples here. It could be if we think about autonomous team that, for example, have access to the resources such as devices for testing, it could be the licenses in order to do their work effectively. And you've got to have the autonomy to access those resources as when you need them, whether those are borrowed, whether those are kind of required just for that team. You've got to be able to have autonomy and access to those resources. And the last element of the supply side is authority. And authority, it's simply a permission, is this understanding of what are we allowed and not allowed to do. And here I also want to talk about this idea of moving authority to where the information is. Because quite often when we look at the, especially large organization, the teams are given certain authority, but they not always got all the authority they require in order to be effective. And making the organizational changes and negotiating that authority for the team to actually be able to do and be allowed to do what they need to do in order to achieve that objective we mentioned at the beginning of this section, it's a very important part of moving authority to information. So bringing closer and closer authority to make decisions, authority to steer conversations, authority to make choices on scope, authority to manage risks, to where the people with the information are, and it's supplying them with the relevant context in order for them to effectively make those decisions. So those are the 6 elements of autonomy, and they actually required to be managed in a way that actually enables that autonomy. And now here handing over to Daniel, who will talk you through a model of how those 6 elements got to be looked at and treated at the organizational level in order to truly enable this to work for your organization.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so and you know, we've spent a lot of time thinking about these 6 elements. These we think these are both necessary and sufficient. So in other words, if you have these 6 things, you genuinely can operate as an autonomous team, as an autonomous unit. If you're missing any of these things, you simply can't, right? You're going to be constrained in some way. You're going to be limited in some way. So, and it should be pretty obvious here that these things are kind of interrelated. They don't all stand separately. So if the objective changes, for instance, the capability you need as a team necessarily changes. If the objective is to now deliver this system rather than that system, or to deliver into this environment rather than that environment, then suddenly you may not have the skills and the people and the experience and the knowledge in the team. You may not have the authority, the permission to use those environments or to carry out those actions. So the supply side is a function of the demand side, and the demand side ideally is a function of the direction of the organization. So I've been noodling on this for a while, and and I've come up with a term that I want to introduce that I'm calling autonomy liquidity. Now, this is a deliberate nod to some work that a chap called Chris Matz did a number of years ago about skills liquidity. He originally called it staff liquidity, but then he realized it's actually about skills. And liquidity is a finance term. Liquidity means how easy it is to get hold of something in a market. It actually means more than that, but I don't want to get into detailed financial terminology. And what he observed is not only do you need certain skills and capabilities in a team, but depending on how available those skills and capabilities are, influences your strategy, if you like, influences how you go about getting those things. So I've expanded that idea to the whole of autonomy, to all our elements. So if we think of each element as an asset, then we can look at the objective as an asset, the constraints are an asset, accountability, capability, resources, authority. Each of those are things we need, okay? And things we may lack, things we may need more of. And we can look at each of those assets and they have liquidity. So each of them are differently hard or easy to obtain. And then once we look at each of these elements, and again, each of these elements itself is multidimensional. So as Anna's saying, capability isn't a single linear thing. It's many skills. It could be experience, and not just how much experience you have of, say, Java programming or financial modeling. but how much experience you have of this particular system, of this organization, of this particular problem space. So experience can be very specific. Information isn't necessarily knowledge, isn't necessarily knowing general things. It could be knowing exactly how this organization works and who you need to talk to get this thing done. I saw a lovely quote recently. It said intelligence is knowing how to answer questions. Wisdom is knowing the answers, and wisdom is knowing the questions. And I'm a fan of that. So it's a lot about questions. So then now we understand the liquidity of each asset. We're going to use that liquidity to guide how we as a team achieve autonomy, maintain autonomy, and balance autonomy maybe with other teams. And remember, liquidity is a function of time, right? So for instance, let's take a look at authority. Typically early on, authority is a function of trust. And early on, you need to gain trust. You need to establish trust. And so authority might be hard to come by. As you gain more trust in the organization, more kudos in the organization, as you gain more authority, it attracts more authority. Anna already has we've seen in the last few releases, Anna's had permission to do the compliance sign-offs. Clearly, the compliance team trusts her. Now she's asking for authority to do some of the InfoSec, some of the security sign-offs, and she's working closely with the InfoSec team. They're more likely to want to offer that authority once they know that she's established trust somewhere else. So these things can be reinforcing. So use liquidity to guide strategy. What does that mean? Well, here's a simple example. It goes a lot deeper than this, but this just to give you an idea of some of the directions you can take it. So is it easy to obtain? Okay, so I'm lacking, I need to do some Python development in my team in order to get some work done. Python as a programming skill is I think of it as a very liquid skill. It's very easy to learn Python. If we don't know Python in the team, we can learn it in a few weeks. We can figure our way out. So let's just go get it. Let's just go get some of that skill, that capability. Let's think objective, right? So we may say, well, do you know what? We're not really sure. The objective is ambiguous. It's vague. We're not really sure, what our success criteria are. Well, can we go and talk to some people? Are there some published OKRs that we can calibrate against? Again, if it's easy to do that, let's just go do it. It may be that it's less liquid, it's less easy to get hold of. People are less willing to offer it. Well, then in that case, we might borrow some. And so, for instance, with skills and capabilities, borrowing some might be something like getting in some contractors or some consultants for a short period of time. I need to do some COBOL work, and COBOL skills are fairly illiquid. There's not that many people around with deep COBOL skills, so I can go and hire some people to get me out of a hole. It may be while I'm doing that, I'm also skilling up. And so by the time we're done with this piece of work, I now have established some COBOL skills in the team. And then finally, if it's impossible to obtain, right? If this skill is not just a scarce resource, it's not available, then we can recognize that and we can choose not to waste our energy or not to waste our energy for now. And I see teams like burning lots and lots of energy, trying to move immovable objects. And rather than that, accept that this is a hard constraint for now. It may soften over time. We may do work to soften it over time. But let's not go after that now. Let's focus on the things we can do. And let's see if we can balance up our autonomy elements such that we can work in an autonomous way. And a lot about the autonomy liquidity model is it's a tool. It's a tool to use to observe, to calibrate, if you like, your own liquidity as a team, or if you're working at an organizational level, to help teams calibrate their own autonomy. And so, as we said, we need both autonomy and alignment, right? And you may have heard this many times. Let's take a look at why we need autonomy and alignment. Let's say we're really good at alignment. We're really good at laying down the law. We're really good at telling people where they need to be. We're great at setting direction. We're great at sharing practice. We're really, really good at setting at deciding what's going to happen next. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, that means that we have alignment but no autonomy. So that's autocracy. That's just telling people what to do. And people who are told what to do very rapidly lose motivation, lose morale. Dan Pink's famous book, Drive, talks about his three elements: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. without the ability to become masters of what you're doing, without the ability to make your own choices on the way to that goal, you lose that drive. Conversely, if you just have autonomy, okay, if teams are allowed to do what they want, but there's no overarching, there's no governing constraint there, there's no direction, then autonomy without alignment is anarchy. There's a lovely, Kent Beck tweeted this a couple of years ago. It just makes me smile every time I say it. He says, autonomy without accountability is vacation. And I just thought that was such a brilliant observation. There's this wonderful illustration from Henrik Knieberg. He's just this wonderful human being, also brilliant cartoonist. And he was working at Spotify when they were doing this work. And they talked about autonomy with alignment. And he has this nod to the pointy head boss from Dilbert. And he says, you know, here's a little quadrant diagram of what happens when you have high or low autonomy and high or low alignment. I'll leave you with that. It's just where you can see these little people's faces. That's my favorite takeaway from this whole cartoon, is just look at the little faces, the little green happy faces and the little gray sad faces, right? That's everything you need to know about autonomy with alignment. So that's the model. Okay, and I'm just going to hand back to Anna now. We're just going to talk about so what. So how do you apply this?
So how to get started? How to apply this to your working environment? And as Daniel said, those are the questions that we could answer either at the team level. So if you are working as a part of the team, which you can ask yourselves is like, hey, for our organization, like, do we understand the purpose of that organization? Do we know what our OKRs are? Do we know what they're rolling up to? And also, are we working in the most effective way, sharing the methods and tools and the practices with other teams or across the organization with other people? The same questions can be also asked by the management, by the leadership, to say, hey, how aligned is our organization? Are we clear on our purpose? Are people clear on the purpose of that organization? Do we have OKRs? Are they good OKRs? Are we able to actually communicate them? Are they actually understood? And our people working effectively? Do they have the tools they need? Are those practices they're using shifting us in the direction of where we want to be? So that's on the alignment part. You can also ask similar questions. You can also ask questions on the autonomy part. It's like, do we as a team feel autonomous? And where would we actually place ourselves on those different elements of autonomy that we have discussed earlier? And we actually want to give you a little gift. And we have created this little assessment tool that you can just take a screenshot of and just kind of place yourself, or where would you feel you are as an organization? And once you kind of understand where you are in terms of your direction, the practice, the focus, as well as the autonomy of those different elements we've discussed, the real question to ask is like, where is your biggest impediment and how can you address it? And the trick here is that, you know what, there might be more than one. They might be more than one, and they might be 3 or 5, or you say, oh, there is so much to do in our organization. And here we really got to apply the theory of constraints. And the theory of constraint focus on your weakest link, focus on the thing that actually is impeding you the most. So identify your biggest impediment, your biggest blocker, the thing that, you know what, if we can change this one thing, everything will start slowly changing. And recently we actually, Daniel actually posted it from Twitter. There was this picture of a kid actually swinging on a swing and having a happy time in the neighborhood, but the neighborhood was on fire, right? And the neighborhood was on fire, and this kid was just happy swinging. And for me, that was this fantastic illustration of what theory of constraints really mean, is that, you know, we can be focusing on the things that are easy to fix, the things that are fun to fix, but the things that actually are not making that much difference to our teams, and the organization overall. And where our focus really should be is putting down that biggest fire, the thing that is really causing us the biggest pain. So pick the one thing that you can change and think about what can you do to address it. Either what can you do, who can you influence to address it, or who do you need to get help from in order to unblock your team and address that impediment. So that's our little takeaway, and that is taking us to our wrap up. Just to kind of finalize, what have we learned here?
Thanks, Anna. So wrapping up, I'm going to say this for the 100th time. I suspect I will need to say it many, many more times. you don't scale Agile. Okay, you can't scale Agile. Agile in software development is a set of principles and a set of guidelines put forward by a bunch of folks who really care about this stuff. And the problem they were solving in the 90s was, how can a team effectively deliver software in an organization where that's hard? Okay, so this stuff started in enterprise. XP came out of a financial systems product in Chrysler, in automotive. Scrum started in public sector, in healthcare and education, rather, as one of the many places it started. DSDM was deliberately a consortium of people who were fed up with this. So Agile methods started as team scale responses to things. They didn't have an opinion about scale because that wasn't the problem. Getting anything shipped was the problem. And they're really good at that now. So you can't scale Agile. That doesn't make sense. The question doesn't make sense. What you can do is you can enable agility at scale. And agility is about business agility. It's organizational agility. It's the ability of an organization to solicit feedback, to respond to that feedback, to measure its response to that feedback, and to iterate. So it's about turning the organization into a dynamic, adaptive system rather than a static monolith. And that's really what we're trying to do. And we're saying that the model that we've found that works, and I'm going to argue it's the only one I can think of that would work, is that you need autonomy with alignment. Okay, you need the ability for teams to execute. You need them to know what the direction is. And we're saying that alignment comes through these three different axes, if you like, three different dimensions of direction and practice and focus. So direction, where are we going as an organization? Where are we going as a product strategy? Where are we going as a technology strategy? Practice, are we reinventing the wheel? Are we getting any economy of scale from being in an enterprise? So how do we align practice across the organization? And focus, right? How do we learn to say no, or at least learn to say not yet? And OKRs are by far the best model I've found to do that so far. If I find a better one, I'll use that. And then autonomy comes from managing liquidity, managing these 6 elements, understanding, doing that gap analysis, seeing where we need to go. So you don't scale Agile, you enable agility at scale, and you enable it through autonomy with alignment. And I'd like to thank Anna for sharing this journey with me. It's been an awful lot of fun. And with that, I'm going to hand over and ask if there are any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.